All right, let's get underway. The Lord be with you.
And Spirit.
Not hearing you.
Blessed Lord, who has caused all holy scriptures to be written for our learning, grant that we may in such wise hear them, read, mark, learn, and inwardly digest.
Okay, shoot.
That by patience and comfort of thy holy word we may embrace and ever hold fast the blessed hope of everlasting life which thou hast given us in thy Son, our Savior Jesus Christ. Amen. Can't hear us, Sharon? I muted you.
She's muted herself too, or somebody. Oh,
No,
did you? Oh,
Okay. Well, it's one of those days where Patsy, you're the only one who's not having technical difficulty.
I know. Is that something? I guess it's true that you learn from your mistakes. I've just had so many of them.
Yes. All righty. Well, when last we met at the end of February, we read the fourth letter, which is all about prayer. And the fifth letter, which is next up, is on the spiritual challenges involved in the state of war, something that is always relevant. So let's take a quick look at that. There we go. This is the fifth of the Screwtape letters. And Patsy, why don't you start reading and we'll wait and see if Sharon and Charlie can hear us.
Okay. My dear Wormwood, it is a little bit disappointing to expect a detailed report on your work and to receive instead such a vague rhapsody as your last letter. You say you are delirious with joy because the European humans have started another of their wars. I see very well what has happened to you. You are not delirious, you are only drunk. Reading between the lines in your very unbalanced account of the patient's sleepless night, I can reconstruct your state of mind fairly accurately. For the first time in your career, you have tasted that wine, which is the reward of all our labors, the anguish and bewilderment of a human soul, and it has gone to your head. I can hardly blame you. I do not expect old heads on young shoulders. Did the patient respond to some of your terror pictures of the future? Did you work in some good self-pitying glances at the happy past? Some fine thrills in the pit of his stomach were there? You played your violin prettily, didn't you? Well, it's all very natural. But do remember, Wormwood,
And let's test the microphone.
that duty comes before pleasure. If any present self-indulgence on your part leads to the ultimate loss of the prey, you will be left eternally thirsting for that draught of which you are now so much enjoying your first sip.
Beautiful. Beautiful. This is a nice portrait, in the words of Screwtape, how the dark spiritual forces work on our souls. Okay. Did the patient respond to your terror pictures of the future? Or did you work in some good self-pitying portrait looks back at the happy past? And they can only keep thoughts out of our minds or attempt to shape the way things go inside of our heads. And they do that either very, very well or ineffectively if we have the power of spiritual resistance and spiritual discipline and focus. And that is the objective of prayer and worship. That's what it's all for. Sharon and Charlie, can you hear us?
We do.
Ah,
Okay.
excellent. You have resolved the demonic
have.
possession of your
It
computer.
seems like every time there's a, yes, so
You hear us?
apparently.
There's
Yes.
always something going on. So Wormwood is excited that there is another European war. And it has gone to his head. The fact that his patient, the real main character of the Screwtape letters, is not Screwtape or Wormwood, it's the patient. And he's the real protagonist because all that is going on in the letters is the senior devil giving advice to the younger devil about how to deal with the patient, and he's the protagonist.
Mhm.
Okay, so he is having inner turmoil about the coming of the Second World War. That's what is being discussed by Screwtape. And here he's going to, the next part is especially satirically humorous. Sharon, can you read? Of course, war is entertaining.
Of course, a war is entertaining. The immediate suffering of the humans is a legitimate and pleasing.
Just a second. We left off on if, on the other hand.
Okay. And Sharon, there's an echo when you talk.
that might take me out of the game here. Unless I
Oh, you
unless
need
I
to
get
scroll
sense.
up, Father.
Okay, hang on. We've got
Maybe we're gonna do
multiple
this together.
problems. Ah, yes, you're quite right. My apologies.
You miss a really good paragraph otherwise.
I missed a whole paragraph there. Okay.
If, on the other hand, there we go.
Okay. All right. Well, I'll pick that up while Sharon works on her microphone.
Is this working?
Yes.
All right, we're going totally low tech here.
Wonderful.
We have it right.
Oh, you sound
Okay.
fine.
Yes, I keep trying something that is a higher tech and it's not working. Okay. Okay. If, on the other hand, by steady and cool-headed application, here and now, you can finally secure his soul, he will then be yours forever, a brimful living chalice of despair and horror and astonishment, which you can raise to your lips as often as you please. So do not allow any temporary excitement to distract you from the real business of undermining faith and preventing the formation of virtues. Give me without fail in your next letter a full account of the patient's reactions to the war, so that we can consider whether you are likely to do more good by making him an extreme patriot or an ardent pacifist. There are all sorts of possibilities. In the meantime, I must warn you not to hope too much from a war.
All right. So the devils want us to be either one of the other extreme. That's very interesting. An ardent patriot or a supreme pacifist.
Mhm.
And he's going to tell us a little bit more about why that might be. The devil.
You realize, right at this moment, Wormwood is basking in the Bahamas because the news media has taken over his job. Or maybe he's got a new job.
Right. And Screwtape has already made that particular. Thanks to the penny press, we have made great progress on filling their heads with all kinds of nonsense. So, very good. Okay, Charlie, you want to pick up where Sharon left off? Down at the bottom, I'll scroll it to the top.
Of course, a war is entertaining. The immediate fear and suffering of the humans is a legitimate and pleasing refreshment. for our myriads of toiling workers. But what permanent good does it do us, unless we make use of it for bringing souls to our Father below? When I see the temporal suffering of humans who finally escape us, I feel as if I had been allowed to taste the first course of a rich banquet and then denied the rest. It is worse than not to have tasted it at all. All or nothing at all. The enemy, true to his barbarous methods of warfare, allows us to see the short misery of his favorites, only to tantalize and torment us, to mock the incessant hunger which during this present phase of the great conflict, his blockade is admittedly imposing.
Stop there for a second. So there's talking not only about war, but about the nature of the conflict between God and the devil. And is Screwtape's perception of things correct? Probably not. God is not torturing the devils. That's not what he's doing. It is their own perspective which leads them to be tormented. They are tormentors, so they can only perceive that what God is doing, he must be tormenting them. They're projecting.
They
And-
are projecting.
Yeah, and Lewis knows that that's what he's doing with this. This is why this is hard for a lot of people to read, because it's the greatest example of the unreliable narrator. Okay. Screwtape, but he's unreliable to the author's purpose because it's satire. True to his barbarous methods of warfare, God is not warring on the devils. They're warring on him. But they can only perceive of God and all things good in their own warped perspective and according to their own very warped perceptions. That was worth pointing out.
Mhm.
Oh, yeah, it is, because otherwise it actually is a little disturbing at times.
Yeah, because you tend to take, especially a first person narrator, you tend to get into their shoes. That's the nature of the first person voice in literature, is you see it yourself in it, as if you were the one, especially when you're reading aloud, you can fall into that fairly easily.
I was struck by the devil's use of the word good.
Of the word what, Charlie?
Good. He uses the word good as if good is a good thing to him, whereas he really should say it would be profitable or advantageous or it would help us,
Yeah.
because I don't think Satan has any understanding of good.
No, only in the instrumental sense.
And just from watching it, I guess, you might say from outside or something.
Let me finish that paragraph. Let us, therefore, think rather how to use than how to enjoy this European war, for it has certain tendencies inherent in it which are in themselves by no means in our favor. There's a surprise, particularly to contemporary ears. You mean not everything about war is demonic and evil? It has certain tendencies inherent which in themselves are not in the demon's favor. We may hope for a good deal of cruelty and unchastity, but if we are not careful, we shall see thousands turning in this tribulation to the enemy, while tens of thousands who do not go so far as that will nevertheless have their attention diverted from themselves to values and causes which they believe to be higher than the self. I know that the enemy disapproves many of these causes, but that is where he is so unfair. He often makes prizes of humans who have given their lives for causes he thinks bad on the monstrously sophistical ground that the humans thought them good and were following the best they knew. Consider, too, what undesirable deaths occur in wartime. Men are killed in places where they knew they might be killed, and to which they go, if they are at all of the enemy's party, prepared. And here's one of my favorite sentences in this entire book. How much better for us if all humans died in costly nursing homes amid doctors who lie, nurses who lie, friends who lie, as we have trained them, promising life to the dying, encouraging the belief that sickness excuses every indulgence, and even if our workers know their job, withholding all suggestion of a priest, lest it should betray to the sick man his true condition.
Hmm.
That was a piece of prophecy.
Hmm.
So it must have already been partly true when Lewis wrote this, but it has certainly become far more true. The more we deal with doctors and especially nursing homes, there's a denial of death and of the prospect of death, which is really extraordinary. They don't want to talk about it. When they do talk about it, frankly, they lie. They don't think they're doing that. They've convinced themselves that they've convinced themselves of their own jargon and of the truth of their own jargon. I mean, I
Also,
just,
doctors have a hard time saying directly, you are going to die
right,
soon. It's tough to say, and a lot of patients' families do not react well
right,
if
true.
you say that. They're in denial, and so what I've seen is the doctors and the nurses they give you the facts, this is serious, but they don't say directly, you are not going to make it. You are on your way out. There's nothing we can do for you.
Right.
You're going to die.
No, they don't.
They don't say that because it's hard to say.
The truth often is.
Yeah.
But the simple fact of the matter is that that's a true statement for all of us right now.
Mm-hmm. That's right.
It's
Memento mori.
merely a question of proximity. And that's exactly where virtue can come from warfare, because there's no more lying to yourself about the prospect of imminent death. And it is possible that you might be prepared for that as a result of that knowledge and awareness.
There are no atheists in the foxhole.
And I think the person who is dying knows that he's being lied to.
Yes.
And I think that this well-meaning lying is reinforcing the state of the patient as a wronged victim, which is exactly where Satan has wanted him to be his entire life.
Right.
If we react to the world as if we are a wronged victim, if we react to God as if we are a wronged victim, then Satan has he has us in his clutches.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And that is one of the things that can happen. I mean, there's denial. That's one thing, but there's also delusion. And the feeling that your own impending death is some kind of wrong that's being committed against you.
It's unfair.
Yeah, it's unfair.
Yeah.
That's the ultimate kind of delusion. And the devils like delusion. They want us to not understand the truth about anything, and they want us to be in a state of not denial, but rejection of the truth, even of the facts. There was only one doctor. My dad's not the oncologist that he was assigned, but the oncologist who actually did the treatment was the only one who said, we cannot cure this. We can treat it, but we cannot cure it. That was the closest anybody said that he was in mortal danger of any kind. The whole time. It was truly astonishing.
It's completely, I'm actually surprised. I mean, but because, you know, the stages of death and dying, I mean, I know that this is what it was like in C.S. Lewis's time. You know,
Sure.
I've heard that, especially in some cultures, in the Japanese culture, they would not tell you you're dying. That's just how it is.
Right.
My dad was a doctor, and I do remember, didn't have that much contact with him, as it turns out, but I do remember him saying, oh, if they don't want to know, I just don't tell them. If they don't already know what malignancy means, then they obviously don't want to know. Like, really? This is 1970.
Interesting.
But the problem is it's completely, dying is against the mission
Right.
of the care of the
Yeah.
doctors.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah.
It's a defeat.
They're interventionists.
Right. And that is a serious flaw in professional consciousness.
Yes.
And they disguise that in hyperspecialization and metastasizing jargon, which is furthered by hyperspecialization. You know, there's 6 or 7 different specialists that you're seeing, and each of them only talk about one little tiny thing, and no one addresses the big picture. Least of all, the big picture around the medical picture, that, you know, get your affairs in order.
Well, they do now refer, it's quite common to refer people that are terminally ill to hospice and to
Yes.
advise the family that there's really not much more that can be done, and they should be in care of a hospice organization. And I've seen those organizations offer spiritual.
Yeah.
They often have a chaplain on their staff. So it's getting better,
Yes, it is.
but it's still very hard for people to, you know, I tell people memento mori, and people think that's morbid. You know, to think about, you're supposed to think about your death. It's like, well, yeah, I think you should.
Yes, you are.
Realize.
But we're on board that path. I mean,
Right.
I'd say especially the Anglican in our church, and the way, you know, the way that we are worshiping, we know.
Right.
We know this.
That's part of its purpose.
Yeah.
And part of its purpose is to prepare you by teaching you spiritual warfare.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's
And
what.
if you're being treated as the, you know, as the victim, the lied to victim, you're seeing that that's a great excuse for not being accountable.
Right.
Instead of thinking this is the time when you should be accounting yourself with your Lord, you know, you're just passively lying there hoping for the best, or, you know, I mean, people need to be real when they're dying.
Right.
It's natural. It's not an affliction. It's something that in our time, it's naturally occurs.
Yeah, to everything there is a
They might
season.
not have been a good plan, but it's definitely agenda these days.
Which leads me to the end of the paragraph. Whoop, where'd it go? I'm sorry, you can probably see it, but there's things concealing the top of it from me. Ah, yes. And how disastrous, but down at the bottom, and how disastrous for us is the continual remembrance of death which war enforces. One of our best weapons, contented worldliness, is rendered useless. In wartime, not even a human can believe that he is going to live forever. Bingo. Talk about hitting the nail on the head. And this last paragraph is actually pretty funny. Sharon, would you read that?
I know that Scabtree and others have seen in wars a great opportunity for attacks on faith, but I think that view was exaggerated. The enemy's human partisans have all been plainly told by him that suffering is an essential part of what he calls redemption, so that a faith which is destroyed by a war or a pestilence cannot really have been worth the trouble of destroying. I'm speaking now of diffuse suffering over a long period, such as the war will produce. Of course, as the precise moment of terror, bereavement, or physical pain, you may catch your man when his reason is temporarily suspended. But even then, if he applies to enemy headquarters, I have found that the post is nearly always defended. Your affectionate uncle, Screwtape.
Great signature.
Prayers are answered, especially prayers in extremis, in distress. You mentioned a saying earlier, Charlie, there are no atheists in foxholes. Kurt Vonnegut said, that's not true. I was one.
Well, that's Kurt.
Yes. But he wrote that in a character voice in a brilliant but disturbing book whose structure is designed to completely eliminate or to argue for the elimination of the significance of death. Slaughterhouse-Five, which that paragraph and that saying is embedded in the main character's voice, takes place not in linear fashion and in this way that sort of argues that the end is not the end. It's really very dangerous and very disturbing on multiple levels. And that's hiding your head in the sand.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But my experience has been that when something really bad is happening to you or about to happen to you, most people start to pray. I remember when my son got really ill, and I really wasn't that much of a Christian, and all of a sudden I was terrified, and I started praying really hard. And I've talked to other people, especially if there's nothing you can do. You know, if you're stuck somewhere, you can't get to the person, or so I was stuck out of town when this happened. When it's really kind of a desperate situation, I find most people do. They don't know what else to do except, please God, help me.
Yeah. Bishop Morris always said that man is incurably religious because of his mortality. So philosophies or literary devices that try to say that isn't so, and there are a lot of them, and there are a lot of them that are popular, even today, especially today, that's self-delusion. That's intentionally blinding yourself to a very important decision that everybody has to make. So,
It is strange. I mean, it almost feels ironic. Perhaps it's not, though, but the more buffered we are, the more cushioned we are, the less we reach out. We are just like, we become numbed with it. It's that, you know, terror. I mean, that adversity that really lets us know that we need help. Yeah.
And that we're vulnerable.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And we need other people and, the whole thing. Yeah.
Well, why don't we start with letter number 6?
Mm.
Whoop. I'm sorry.
Ooh, ooh,
Here we
ooh.
go. This is letter number 6. Patsy, you want to start this one for us again?
Sure. My dear Wormwood, I am delighted to hear that your patient's age and profession make it possible, but by no means certain, that he will be called up for military service. We want him to be in the maximum uncertainty so that his mind will be filled with contradictory pictures of the future, every one of which arouses hope or fear. There is nothing like suspense and anxiety for barricading a human's mind against the enemy. He wants men to be concerned with what they do. Our business is to keep them thinking about what will happen to them.
Brilliant. Brilliant. God is concerned with what we are to do. Okay? Humans being the active participant in our own actions, with an obligation to see that those actions are guided by virtue. Okay? And the enemy wants man, this goes back to the victim mentality. What is going to happen to me? And related to that is the question of the future. Are you a passive participant in the future, or are you an active participant in the future? If your participation in time is passive, then yes, you're always a victim because things are always happening to you. You are not doing. And that's a radically different self-perception of time, or perception of the self in time. Are you active here, or are you just being acted on?
Yes. I was having a conversation with a young man, a recent graduate of the Bear Rescue Missions program today, and he was telling me his story, and he was raised in a family where, your mother's white, your father's black, you're going to have a rough time in life. So being prepared for victimhood. And, I was commenting that little postcard that you can hand out to people on the street says, "You matter."
Mhm.
I think that culturally today, I don't know that we're teaching children that they matter. I think we're raising them to be happy little gift recipients. And so they begin to rate their personal value by the amount of incoming stuff. And so I'm thinking he wants men to be concerned with what they do. Our business is to keep them thinking about what will happen to next. I mean, I think that in wartime, in World War II, everybody rallied but now today, people are not so much interested in themselves and their fellow man as they are in what's going to happen to my stuff.
Yeah.
Not even so, what's going to happen to me and what's going to happen to my stuff.
Yeah.
And all the stuff is what mainly matters. You're kind of off kilter.
That is definitely the wrong order of priority.
Yeah. How do we love our children?
Yeah.
Do we love them by making them know that they're accountable and that their actions, what they say and do matters?
Yeah.
Or do we think that just by being cute and lovable, they're going to get what they want? Keep the stuff coming.
And the next paragraph has a lot to do with that subject, the subject of perception, and what your perception of your own role in your life story is. Charlie, if you would read this for us.
Your patient will, of course, have picked up the notion that he must submit with patience to the enemy's will. What the enemy means by this is primarily that he should accept with patience the tribulation which has actually been dealt out to him, the present anxiety and suspense. It is about this that he is to say, thy will be done, and for the daily task of bearing this, that the daily bread will be provided. It is your business to see that the patient never thinks of the present fear as his appointed cross, but only of the things he is afraid of. Let him regard them as his crosses. Let him forget that, since they are compatible, they cannot all happen to him. And let him try to practice fortitude and patience to them all in advance. For real resignation at the same moment to a dozen different and hypothetical faiths is almost impossible, and the enemy does not greatly assist those who are trying to attain it. Resignation to present and actual suffering, even where that suffering consists of fear, is far easier and is usually helped by this direct action.
It's kind of complex.
That's a
Yes.
complicated paragraph.
Yes, it is. It is complex. But the main thing about it is that for human beings living in time, the future isn't real. And it is more virtuous and therefore more real to bear what is happening now rather than being afraid of what might happen next. And what Lewis just had Screwtape say about, the problem with the future isn't that it hasn't happened yet, it's that there are so many possibilities. And the devils want us to be paralyzed by that fact. All the different things that could happen and paralyzed into inaction in the moment. So you're so afraid of all the things that might happen that you don't do anything, that you become passive. Because the passive person in fear is going to be much more susceptible to the influence of the devils, to what they want us to do.
This actually resonates to some degree with me, with my late husband, who was facing cancer at 38, 39. And the many possibilities, having the big question mark over your head, that just drove him crazy. And he was extremely intelligent and driven, right? So he would be strategizing if this happens, then that. And he had this whole thing going on.
A whole bunch of flowcharts.
Right, exactly. A whole bunch of flowcharts.
Oh, yeah.
And he couldn't let go of that, even as time was progressing and it seemed, quite probable that he was going to die, but we couldn't go there because there was this 2% chance somewhere around the corner. And I understand he's a young guy and he's got a kid, but it is actually really perspicacious. This is really insightful.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. It's not that God doesn't want us to plan for the future. He wants us not to be trapped by it so that we don't notice what's going on in the present. Because the present is the time for action moved by the will, shaped by virtue. And to become completely trapped in the future or the past. Remember, Screwtape talked about that, in telling Wormwood in the previous letter. Yes, put all these fears of the future or these idyllic pictures of the imaginary remembered past. Right? Because the past was never really like we remember it, because we remember it having already happened. And everything seems somehow predetermined. And we can't really recapture the actual mentality behind our decision-making in the past, because we remember it having already happened without the knowledge. And when we make the decisions, we don't know how it's going to turn out. That's one of the great risks in writing history, is that you write it as if it couldn't have happened any other way, and you lose the reality of it. It becomes,
Over and over again, they do that. Yes.
they do
I
that.
find that people are overwhelmed and distracted by overstimulation and anxiety about all sorts of things, and they worry about the future.
Yep.
And they also, I have friends who still bear grudges about the past. If only this had happened, if only that had happened, why did that happen? Why did this happen? Why did that happen? And
Yeah.
I,
It's like a whirlpool.
yeah,
They
yeah,
both are. Those viewing the past that way and viewing the future in anxiety, they're whirlpools that'll
yeah, so you can
suck you
get
down.
really, really messed up. So I tell people, forget the past. Past is gone. Past is dead. Look to the future and just do in the present moment what you can do. What's your next thing, to figure out what the next thing to do is,
Yeah.
and then do it.
And that's all you can actually do.
Yeah,
And very few of us actually do everything we can actually do everything we actually can
we're
do.
too distracted.
Yes, too distracted. Uh,
Too much going on.
yeah, to be virtuous and act in the moment.
And we're wearing ourselves out. You know,
Right.
it's like play the hand you're dealt. Don't worry about the hand that you wish you'd gotten or the next,
Right.
what you might get in the next deal,
Yeah.
because counting cards is exhausting and none of us are really good at it. But it just takes away your energy to deal with the current hand, the present moment.
Right. Right. Which I think we're about to hear articulated by Screwtape. Whoop. Sharon, I think, is it your turn?
I think it might be.
Okay.
An important spiritual law is here involved. I've explained that you can weaken his prayers by diverting his attention from the enemy himself to his own states of mind about the enemy. On the other hand, fear becomes easier to master when the patient's mind is diverted from the thing feared to the fear itself. Considered as a present and undesirable state of his own mind, and when he regards the fear as his appointed cross, he will inevitably think of it as a state of mind. One can therefore formulate the general rule: in all activities of mind which favor our cause, encourage the patient to be unself-conscious and to concentrate on the object. But in all activities favorable to the enemy, bend his mind back on itself. Let an insult, a woman's body, so fix his attention outward that he does not reflect, I am now entering into the state called anger or the state called lust. Contrariwise, let the reflection, my feelings are now growing more devout or more charitable, so fix his attention inward that he no longer looks beyond himself to see our enemy or his own neighbors.
That is just remarkably perceptive. What Lewis is describing by, negation backwards. Our justification, this goes back to a conversation Charlie and Scott and I had yesterday. We have a tendency to think of everything religious as something entirely internal to us. And when we maintain that thought, our religion becomes idolatrous. Because the truth of the matter is that it's about where we fit in something much larger than ourselves. And when we are reflectively brought back to thinking too much about our own states of mind, then we get into trouble. And we don't act when we are able to do so.
So it's become, sorry, I know you're, so our religious state has become narcissistic in a sense, instead
Yeah.
of being of service.
Right.
No, that's easy. Go for it. You're,
It was interesting that he was he was pointing out the effect of being mindful of your state of mind.
Yes.
That thinking, instead of becoming angry, realizing, oh, I'm getting angry. This is pissing me off. Or instead of lusting after a woman, realizing, oh, come on, stop indulging yourself.
Yes.
Which is very interesting that Lewis understood that,
Uh-huh.
what, 80 years ago or something?
Yes. He said you have to, and what he's remember Screwtape is saying things backwards.
Right,
It is good to realize that you are entering into a particular state so that you can do something about it.
right, right.
That
And it is
third person perspective. This is more of a, Buddhism has good tools. It doesn't have the whole truth. That's what I came to understand. But they're tools that are useful in Christianity.
right, of course. Of course. All right. Whose turn is it? We're back to Patsy?
Okay.
I believe so. So let me put this further up. As regards,
As regards, let's see, where am I? Oh, as regards his more general attitude to the war, you must not rely too much on those feelings of hatred which humans are so fond of discussing in Christian or anti-Christian periodicals. In his anguish, the patient can, of course, be encouraged to revenge himself by some vindictive feelings directed toward the German leaders, and that is good so far as it goes. But it is usually a sort of melodramatic or mythical hatred directed against imaginary scapegoats. He has never met these people in real life. They are lay figures modeled on what he gets from newspapers. The results of such fanciful hatred, interesting, are often most disappointing. And of all humans, the English are in this respect the most deplorable milksops. They are creatures of that miserable sort who loudly proclaim that torture is too good for their enemies, and then give tea and cigarettes to the first wounded German pilot who turns up at the back door.
Interesting thing to say.
Yeah.
the imagined enemy.
Right.
Yeah. The imagined enemy is a scapegoat and something that we direct hatred at when real people, when we meet actual real people, we tend to have, if we have any virtue at all, different reactions. Of course, you can allow yourself to be so warped by hatred that you won't ever actually see another human being in the real enemy. But that takes a lot of work, a lot of the work of dehumanization, which many of the world's more wicked cults are expert at.
And during World War II, there was a lot of stereotyping about the Germans and the Japanese, and
Of course.
the Japanese in particular.
Yes.
People really got into that they were the Japs, and they didn't really see them as, if you start seeing them as real human people with lives of their own and families, it's a lot harder to shoot them.
Yes.
And it's much easier to do war by dehumanizing the enemy and considering him just a terrible, evil thing.
Right.
That must be killed.
Yep.
And It's
mean-
hard to avoid that kind of stereotyping, but
It
you
is,
see it all the time. People say, those so-and-sos,
right.
those Democrats, those Republicans.
I mean, right, we have a
Yeah.
lot of it with
Yeah.
people who are.
Yeah, we have a lot of it now internally.
Yeah.
Exactly,
Well,
who are not our great enemies, actually
Right.
just,
It's
you
like,
know.
come on, do you know any evangelicals? Do you actually know any? You know any liberals? Do you know any conservatives? It's like they're people.
Yep.
Yeah.
It's really easy to stereotype.
Very.
But he thinks that the English, of all people, are the most likely to offer the German pilot some tea and a cigarette.
Oh, but they're so polite, right?
It's
Yeah,
probably true.
and
actually.
actually the Germans are almost neighbors. I mean, they're not
Yeah,
so
no, I
completely
know.
different.
No,
Right,
No.
stupid,
Yeah.
crazy.
Yeah.
right, right.
It's
Yeah.
the second or the first?
Second, he's talking.
Second, right,
Yeah, he's talking about it.
or 1941.
Yeah, the whole Habsburg, everything, most of those rulers are related to the English monarchs.
Yeah.
That whatever.
Right. It was very much a family squabble.
Yeah, yeah.
Let's talk about that question of benevolence. That's actually the next paragraph of this letter. And Charlie, I think it's your turn.
Mhm. Do what you will, there is going to be some benevolence, as well as some malice, in your patient soul. The great thing is to direct the malice to his immediate neighbors whom he meets every day, and to thrust his benevolence out to the remote circumference to people he does not know. The malice thus becomes wholly real, and the benevolence largely imaginary. There is no good at all in inflaming his hatred of Germans if, at the same time, a pernicious habit of charity is growing up between him and his mother, his employer, and the man he meets in the train. Think of your man as a series of concentric circles, his will being the innermost, his intellect coming next, and finally his fantasy. You can hardly hope at once to exclude from all the circles everything that smells of the enemy. But you must keep on shoving all the virtues outward till they are finally located in the circle of fantasy, and all the desirable qualities inward into the will.
And remember, by desirable quantities, Screwtape means what we would call undesirable.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. It is only insofar as they reach the will and are there embodied in habits that the virtues are really fatal to us. I don't, of course, mean what the patient mistakes for his will, the conscious fume and fret of resolutions and clenched teeth, but the real center, what the enemy calls the heart. All sorts of virtues painted in the fantasy are approved by the intellect, or even in some measure loved and admired, will not keep a man from our Father's house. Indeed, they may make him more amusing when he gets there. Your affectionate uncle, Screwtape.
Yikes. Yes, I think I've probably said this before in this class that Bishop Morris told me when I got confirmed that now you're going to taste better to the devils
Oh.
Right.
because you are trying to do good and to conform to God's will. And the more you make that effort, the more they're going to come after you. So those who fall are most delicious to the devils when they fall in a virtuous way, or what seems like a virtuous way, but all the virtues are toward the imaginary and real things. You know, this is the man who, and I knew someone like this, who would weep at Martin Luther King's speeches on a record and then proceed to become so emotional as to get drunk and beat his wife. So the virtuous feelings were entirely imaginary, and the malicious was what was actually being acted on. And this was his son who witnessed all of this, who told me this particular thing. And it gives someone, it can give someone a very warped view of the world to see that apparent contradiction. But of course, it's not a contradiction, because the one thing is real and the other is imaginary. So it is not that you're acting in contradiction to your ideals, it's that your ideals are merely ideal. And it is the real that matters. That doesn't mean we shouldn't have ideals. We do have ideals. We have an ideal, Christ crucified. And actually acting on that ideal is the most important thing we can ever do. But we have to actually do it.
Mhm.
In whatever context the good Lord has put us in.
But at least we know what it is.
Yes.
I mean, at least it's, you know, I mean, we go to a place nowadays where that isn't even there, or some of these things which I'll hear people, oh, is it really important that this was that, or yes, that the Virgin Mary was truly virtuous. It's really important.
Yeah.
That we understand, oh, that's what virtue looks like. I mean that we put it on the like, oh, it's there, that's it.
Yeah. The lives of the saints are very important for precisely that reason. There are models of doing and being
Yes.
that are not imaginary.
What I've found is that it's often much easier for people to feel like they're being virtuous towards people who are far away.
Yeah.
And
The circle of fantasy.
right.
Yes.
Right. And to give money to good causes and to help people who are really, really different from them. But to actually be virtuous in the sense of loving your actual neighbor, the people next door to you, or the people in your family,
Right.
that's a lot of work, because
Yes, it is.
those people are not, they're not something you can imagine as just like, oh, these poor starving people that
Right.
are so wonderful, we should help them. It's actually your crotchety neighbor next door who is really a jerk sometimes. How are you supposed to love him? Well,
Yeah.
that takes a fair amount of work.
Right.
And
it's risky.
yeah, and people don't really know how to do it. They're not really trained in, look, this is how you make a friend. You know, you bring him some cookies, or you say hi to him, or you compliment his car, or, you know, something, and you start to get to know somebody.
Yeah.
That takes training.
Yes.
Practice.
And patience.
Yeah, and patience, right.
We've been going through our patient's life right here.
Yes.
And he was grumbling with his mother. He was annoyed at church, people who are not proper, you know, not dressed in a sophisticated manner, people who sing out of tune.
Right.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
All those annoying little things.
All those things.
Yes. And there's no excuse for it. There's no excuse for it. On the other hand, if he was a shoplifter, you don't know, he's just getting bread for his family.
Oh,
Right.
it has to be.
Yeah.
But it is tough. We have a neighbor who's really difficult.
Well, she's crazy.
She's crazy.
She's actually one of those cases where, anyway,
It's very difficult to chat her up and be
Right.
nice to her. And
But
Right.
you want to be careful that she doesn't, because she's done.
Yeah.
She's done things that were very strange, which I will not put out there now.
We are meant to be realistic.
Yeah.
And,
but the
and
admonition to love your neighbor, I think a lot of people just pay lip service to that. And you ask them, well, do you like your neighbor? And they're like, I don't know. I don't even know him. You know, I don't even know his name, actually.
well, remember, you have to love him. You don't have to like him.
Right, right. That's right.
Not the same thing.
Not-
And
And-
sometimes loving your neighbor means leaving them alone
yeah,
if they're not able to receive what you're trying to give.
She did strange
Yeah.
things. It was, but you can, here's the, whatever, threading the needle. You can be sorry. You can be compassionate for her. She's obviously had some
Yeah.
stuff going on, and maybe, she's
Yeah.
got
The
some
mother's
mental
in the-
stuff,
the mother's in the hospital. Yeah.
Something's happened.
but
There's a story there that you don't know,
Right.
yes.
Yep, yep.
but don't ask her about it
Because
because that would not be loving.
Good idea.
she did weird things. Yeah, it's a little scary. So yeah.
Yeah.
Well, we will pick it up with letter 7
Oh, we're
next.
gonna have fun.
I
This
think
is-
we're back on
is-
track. We should just
this
keep
is-
going.
Very good.
The Lord be with you.
And with that,
Let us pray. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, and the power, and the glory, ever and ever. Amen. The Lord bless you and keep you. The Lord make his face to shine upon you and be gracious unto you. The Lord lift up his countenance before you and give you all the blessings of his peace. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Ghost. Amen.
Amen.
Thank you all very much.